We are recording to a computer, not to the cloud. So off we go. Tripp, you called this meeting. You bring us in. What we're doing.
Yeah, um so I wanted to have a conversation about AI, and my observation was that the discussion around AI has kind of broken containment in some way. It's not that it's never been a topic that's been around and that kind of thing, but I feel like it's been kind of constrained to certain corners of the internet and punditry and that kind of stuff. And primarily it's around jobs, like what's going to happen in the job market, those kind of things. Um, and then, there's some secondary conversations about, is it going to kill us all, right? So those are like kind of the two. So if you're a tech bro and, and or like a private equity, like econ investor, like these were very interesting conversations. That's been primarily, I think, what the conversation has been around AI. And I've observed over the past month that it has broken out of that kind of bubble, and we're having different kind of conversations. There's been some in the past that I've observed, but it's mainly around like pastors like using AI to write sermons, these kind of things, right? Which is kind of related to the way I think it's broken containment. But I think it's broken containment in ways that people are talking about it now as regarding education, creativity in terms of art, those kind of things. So it's kind of like expanded beyond that. And in some ways, it's become a bigger conversation than like the economics, even though there's been some things going on even today. Sam, I don't know if you saw that Block is laying off 40% of their workforce. And Jack, the founder of Twitter, is saying, yeah, it's because of AI, the 40% of their workforce. And so for those who don't know, Block used to be Square. So you've used it. So Block, Cash App is the Block is the parent company of Square, Cash App, and a couple other companies. And Jack is the founder, the original founder of Twitter. And so that just happened today. That they're laying off. They have about 10,000 employees. They're laying off over 4,000. And they're saying
That's
specifically because of AI. So anyway,
okay.
so there's still the economics and jobs thing, so which I want to talk about, but I kind of want to talk about the way it's broken containment, and that's kind of why I wanted like a mix of tech people, but then also pastor education and that kind of stuff to talk about like what do we think about it? And but first, I guess my question to kick it off is: have you observed this? Are you seeing what I'm seeing in terms of that?
I guess I can go first.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm probably somewhat inside the bubble too, but I do feel like I can see it creeping out of the bubble. Um, I've been using the AIs to help me at my own job at Google for a couple years now. And I feel like originally it was like, oh, they could write some short snippets of code just with some verbal instructions, but I often have to double check it and get it to work. But it was still a little bit faster than writing the whole thing myself. Or take this thing that I already wrote and reapply it in this use case over here that's just slightly different or something like that. And then it got, to the point where I could give it just a little bit of instructions and it could write something that normally would have taken me a day. And then I could do it and it would write something that might have taken me a week. And it would, but I could still look at the code and understand what I was doing. And then sometimes I'd look and be like, I would have never thought to do it that way. That's brilliant. That's clever. That's more clever than I would have written myself. And then recently it's been like, what is this alien gibberish that I just was given? I have no idea how this works, but it works. And what was that? And that was a different level of interacting with this stuff. Like I've been in the past a little bit, I don't know if I've been an optimist or a pessimist. I've been sort of, I think that the capabilities were overblown and that people didn't need to be as scared in either direction, in either a positive or a negative direction. But I've been surprised at its pace and its capabilities. And I feel like I'm changing my tune a little bit compared to things that I've said in the past. I previously thought that we would notice it hit a limit at being able to be a highly skilled human copier. Because the way these things work is mostly imitating human generated text from the past. whether that's software code or books or tweets or whatever it is. The way these things get trained, at least the way they used to get trained, is you give them a huge body of text, trillions of words, and you say, all right, here is 200 words, guess the next word, right? And you just have it get really, really good at that, right? I've sort of called it a human crossword puzzle or a computer crossword puzzle solver and stuff like that. But what I didn't anticipate, and one of the ways that I think that these things work is, especially with respect to coding, they are going beyond human ability, because what they do is you can have an AI ask another AI to write some software code, and then it can check itself to see if the code that it wrote works, and then it can optimize its code to use less computing power or use less characters or whatever to write it. And it's sort of like AI got really good at chess. It got superhuman at chess because it can play itself in chess. Yep. Because chess is a contained system.
Yeah.
You can play yourself in chess on a computer. And so it can just play itself billions and billions of times and quickly outstrip any amount of human experience in chess. And it can do something similar now for software coding, where it's training itself to write software code and then evaluating its own ability and improving in its own closed loop, as opposed to simply copying code that was previously written by humans. And that is something that I didn't really think about. And the implications of that are really big, obviously, for code writing, but they might go beyond code writing in terms of what the implications of that are. And so I've been noticing that in my bubble, but I'm starting to hear things, Tripp and I will text each other articles, but I'm starting to hear buzz about this that's different than the buzz that was previous.
I mean, look, for me, this kind of thing sort of pre-hits all the quadrants, for piquing my interest. I have a little bit, maybe a lot bit of a kind of an apocalyptic streak in my imagination. And so when people started whispering about it in December of 23, I think it was. I think the first models were really kind of released in November of 23. And I'm talking about the models that were sent out into the
like the
wild.
public LLMs.
You and I could pop in, and
yeah.
And it became pretty clear to me pretty quickly. I mean, literally within the first 2 months, I remember distinctly sitting in a coffee shop over Christmas break, in between shopping for whatever and whatnot, and reading some of the output. And what was shocking to me about the output is that, it wasn't that bad, actually. And it had the capabilities of putting together at least a kind of logical structure and kind of through line for a basic 3 to 5 page paper, right? The kind of things that I would assign my students. And my immediate reaction to it was, this has rendered the exercise totally hackable. And this is, and in my world, English teachers, humanities teachers are not going to want to face the truth, which is an AI can do what we thought was the gold standard assessment.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore it's going to cause, and of course these were really, I mean, Sam, you might remember this, Tripp, you too. I don't know, Paul, much you fiddled with them back in the day, but they were still pretty bad then.
Right. Yeah. They were still rudimentary. Yep.
Yeah. Hallucinations were rampant, making up stuff was, so if you knew even a little bit about the topic, they were pretty piss poor, but they were really good at, again, like a sophomore in high school or even a sophomore in college, kind of putting together a kind of basic reading of, The Great Gatsby, the green light in Great Gatsby. It can quickly source all the billions of essays who were written on that exact same topic and throw together that was something, basically good. Anyway, so for me, I very quickly sort of it triggered all of my kind of apocalyptic imagination. And I really haven't moved that far off of that, if I'm being blunt. Now my sense of the catastrophe has certainly grown. But I felt it right away in terms of the kind of work that I'm trying to do, right? Sam, for you, I would have 100% would have embraced it exactly the way that you kind of lay out that process that you laid it out. Like, oh, I've got some code, I need some take a look at it, or I've got this, can you repurpose? Like, makes total sense to me, right? Because you're dealing explicitly with code, and there's a kind of in when you study poetry, when you teach poetry, sort of the day two assignment is, uh, introducing or reminding the students of the difference between, denotation and connotation, right? And so, the scientific use of language is denotive, which is why binary becomes the ultimate language because it's on or off, right? It's one or zero or however it works, right? And so, there is no connotation in a zero or a one as far as the way that we understand code, which is why we can translate it to a computer and a computer can translate it to us, right? And we have these layers that are on top of all that, which give us language that, I don't speak code, right? Maybe you do a little bit, but like I don't speak binary at all. But my computer can talk to me because, that code goes all the way down, right? It goes all the way down to zeros and ones. But in poetry, right, it's not, so I'm calling that the kind of the kind of denotative brilliance of code. Um, and yet in poetry, there's this sort of steering, almost in the opposite direction, that what you're trying to convey is, the sort of the smuggled meaning in the code that is associative and it's feeling based. It's whatever, it's all this sort of stuff that we talk about here at the corner about metaphor, etc. And so but I also know that that stuff just does not translate. um you know it doesn't translate in quite the same way. Now I can get an LM to fake it.
Mm.
I can, because there's enough readings of a poem, like on, let's say, Donne's, I don't know, Valediction Forbidding Morning, a very famous poem, and there's probably no fewer than, 500,000 essays that have been fed through the LLMs. So it can make one up, but what you're trying to do with a student is to get them to kind of that the analysis is a precondition for you to return to the poem so that you can understand the poem in all of its connotative, suggestive, ambiguous brilliance. And so, but I also know that the work that I'm trying to get them to do in terms of analysis is totally hackable. It is now officially a dumb assignment. The temptation is way too much. The machine is already better than 99 of my best 100 students.
Yeah.
Now, again, I'm teaching high school 10th graders, right? So I'm not going to make an argument about PhD students and whatnot. I don't want anybody to get, too upset with me here. But I know it's better than 95 of my top 100 students that I've taught in the last 20 years.
Yeah.
Do you have a way? I mean, basically, education is within this tradition.
Yeah.
And essay writing, I mean, when I went through
Yeah.
school, I mean, I was always writing essays in college and seminary. Um, do you have a way? I mean, suddenly you're provoked to ask the question,
Why am I
what
even doing
exactly is the end game
Yeah,
that
the
we're
cheat list.
looking for, and
Yeah.
how can we go
Yeah.
about it when this previous tradition is
Right.
just sort of feels like, whether or not it is, but it feels like it's just sort of made foolish.
Right. Now, remember, if I, take a poem and I read it 20 times and I look up some words, I'm doing all the kind of work, and I sit down and I go on my computer and I type out this paper, I print it out, I edit my draft, I rework it and I spit it out. The assignment works, right? I am forcing myself into a kind of uh, uh, discipline, right? An exercise, a practice that will, in the end, result in me, for lack of a better way to say it, leveling up, right? So like that still works, right? I can do it. My students can do it. The problem is that the constraints there are no constraints now, right? So anything that gets turned in that passes through a computer is automatically suspect.
Yeah.
And I'm not even getting into the sort of the little built-in AIs that are part of Word or Google Docs, or there's all that stuff too. But naturally, LLMs are, that's a whole different thing. So anyway, my point here is that discipline that you're talking about, Paul, actually did work, and it does work, but all the incentives are in the opposite direction, because the incentives have, right? In other words, what the LLMs have done, what these AIs have done, is that it has exposed the kind of decadent rot of a system that has been retrofitted to produce grades and to produce resumes and to produce all those sorts of things. And so what the LLMs have done is have exposed the lie of modern contemporary credentialing education.
And I think that that's why I think that it's broken, at least from what I'm seeing, broken containment, as I was saying, because it entered into another realm that people even though I agree with you, like progressive education, I'm calling it progressive, not in like the political sense, but progressive education, like in the Dewey sense, it's fundamentally like it's about like a functional end, right? So like I'm here to be a good citizen, or I'm here to be a good cog in the economic machine. I'm here to produce a good grade. I'm here to like produce a good artifact, a poem, an essay, whatever, as opposed to a more traditional or classical view of education. I think that's why it's broken containment, because people are, I think, starting to see there's something wrong here. Right. If this is really the end, if really the end of this, of me doing this activity is a poem, this LLM can do it better than me.
Right. And therefore, maybe it always was bullshit. Right.
Yeah.
And again, I want to be careful here, because, I'm actually not cynical. but there's something about the structure that it seems to it's in the process of being exposed as always already corrupt.
And that's what, like, I'm more hopeful that I see that the reaction is stronger on this side, at least like wider in the public, than it is even in the job side or whatever, even though maybe we should be concerned about that too. I think and that is interesting. I was talking to a friend who works at Meta, and he was frustrated about it. He was like, everyone, like over the past month, everyone's talking about, should we make movies with AI? Should we do this with AI? Should we do? He's like, I've been for years complaining about like the dangers of AI, but it was primarily around jobs, and it was primarily around like existential threats and that kind of stuff. And he's like, why now everyone's talking about it, but they're not talking about these things. They're talking about art. And I just kind of laughed, because I was like, isn't that the most natural human reaction that you could think of, is that one, right? Of course, like it's education. Like, what are we doing actually right now? So anyway, that's why I think it's broken. It's a little bit hopeful to me, honestly. So that's why I think it's interesting.
Well, I'm certainly not ready to be hopeful about it, because I take your point, Tripp. I'm not trying to be
no, I get it. No,
contrarian.
I'm hopeful that people are seeing this as a problem, right, for the right reasons, actually.
But I'm intrigued Sam, you sort of are talking about maybe two bubbles, right? You're talking about the bubble of your work world, which is high tech. I think it's okay to say you work at, the Google.
I work at the Google. Yeah.
You know, and so I imagine I appreciate your sort of insight into that bubble, and people probably have been, I don't know if you have to do Slack channels, all this sort of stuff, but I'm sure people have been talking about Claude code and all these kinds of things. I know it's not your company, but you get the point, right? Um, but but that's not my world at all. Um, but I would say that in my own professional bubble, people are just completely ignoring it, completely ignoring it. Okay. But then when I think about, this little corner and these kind of conversations that we have online, um, you know, I'm fascinated by how this Silicon Valley conversation is now all over the place, and you have a variety of hot takes. You've got the sort of the it seems to me very clear boosterism of sort of the tech crowd, especially at the higher echelons. It's very hard to understand what people are, what's real and what's not real. And then you've got, on the flip side, you've got the Yukowskis, who, if you build it, it'll kill us all, and they all get slimed or maybe, framed as, doomers, right? But, all the podcasts that I listen to, like beyond, the ones are my friends here, like Diary of a CEO, like every week, one of his episodes is trying to get people to talk about AI. And he's not a tech guy. He's someone who's an early adopter. He embraces it for his work, but he's also got this other part of him, that's like, are we hurtling, into the void? Douthit has had a couple of really great conversations. The one that really caught my attention last year was with the Cocatillo, I think his name is, the AI 2027 gang.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm kind of watching this not as a tech guy and not even really as a teacher. I'm really kind of just watching this as a man in his 50s with teenage children, and all these people are just kind of blithely noting that, oh yeah, white collar jobs are gone quickly. And you sort of like, I'm sorry, wait, what? Can we pause and just like talk about that for a little bit? So I haven't heard anything to make me not feel um very, very, very concerned about it on that front.
Has AI changed? I mean, now again, you're humanities,
Mhm,
English,
mhm,
great books.
mhm,
Has that changed what you actually do in class, or are you just basically saying, yeah, don't let Gemini write your paper,
mhm,
please?
mhm. Yeah, I mean, look, my entire career has been, you know, um, I'm old fashioned. I'm old school. It's like a book and a pen or a pencil, and let's go at it, right? So I don't teach scholarship, right? I'm not in graduate school where I'm doing all that sort of thing. It's really like, okay, here's a book. Like right now we're reading Paradise Lost. Arguably top two, three most difficult things to read in the English language. And I'm like, what's on the page? Can you tell me what is on this page? You know,
Yeah,
and
it's
and you
live.
it really is. And it's like, let's look up words. And okay, we skipped over all these words and you might have a kind of a sense of what it means, but let's go back to that word. So I'm doing a lot of that just
Yeah.
really, lab work, right? I'm like, or maybe a better way to think of it is it's studio work. I'm where we're, instead of clay and paints and whatnot, I'm like, these are words, and what do these words mean, and what are the multiple meanings? So that's always been what I've done in the classroom, and
Are you
that's
doing blue? Are you doing like blue books and
oh
oral
sure,
exams? Like how do you? Yeah.
sure, I do a
Okay.
lot of blue book stuff. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
but again, I always have. I've always been a kind of biased toward that. even though I never would have considered myself a Luddite, or anything like that, I've always been, when it comes to what I bring to the classroom and what I'm trying to do with my kids, it's always been, that level of technology, the technology of, the squiggly lines on a page.
What kind of school do you teach at?
It's a prep school, it's a boarding school.
Okay, so is it a classical school? Is it like more like traditional
No.
college prep, and you're just kind of an outlier in it? Maybe.
Well, the reason why I came here, almost 20 years ago is that it's a boarding school. It's a New England boarding school, but there are a couple of caveats there. It's Catholic, and it is whereas I think there's one other New England boarding school that's Catholic, and all of the other boarding schools were originally mainline, mostly Anglican, some Presbyterian, versions of that. And so my school has always been a little bit of an outlier, is that it was literally formed in the mid 20s, 1920s, 1926 actually, and it was formed as a way of getting rich, mostly Irish
Yeah,
Catholics.
that's by the time the Irish people had started
Yeah.
to catch up with the WASPs, they decided they
Yeah.
needed some boarding schools.
Because remember, the only way to get into the Ivy Leagues is, there was no SAT. It was like, the headmaster of Groton would call up, the president of Harvard and says, yeah, okay, you need to take these five guys. I've got five, or, three of them are going to go to Dartmouth, three of them are going to Cornell, and, blah, blah, blah. You just sort of rattled off. And that's how they handled admission. So all of the mainline schools were non accessible by Catholics and Jews. So the Catholics had the idea of, well, we'll just make our own, and that's what they did, and it was fairly successful. A couple of the Kennedys went through here, and and all that. So anyway, this model then is not a classical school, though. Back in 1926, it was a classical
Sure, it's
school.
closer. Yeah, right.
Yeah, you did Latin, you did Greek, you did English, you did math, advanced math. It was all the real deal. Now, of course, it's like every other school. We've got
Yeah,
AP classes and all that kind of stuff. So
yeah.
we're a conventional school. But in 1999, the then Abbott headmaster, he was a guy who occupied both positions, which is like weird and crazy and super powerful. Decided to kind of go against the grain, and they reinstituted the Latin requirement, and they created a humanities program, which was kind of a hop, skip, and jump through the great books. Basically starts with St. Paul's letter to the Romans, and we get on up to Joyce, right? And it's just this kind of, and it's team taught, and it's a great class, and it's why I moved my family here back in 2008, I think it was 2009. Yeah, 2008. So I am not the classical school movement, which I have great affection and esteem for. I would not be considered a classical educator in that sense, though everything that I do, I think I would slot very
Would fit.
easily. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would suspect that the AI impact. So my wife is an elementary school teacher in a California public school, but in a Waldorf school.
Mm-hmm.
That the impact of, I think we're going to see AI hit elementary schools way earlier and way harder. And it's too early for you to see, the products of that getting to your class and their capacity to handle a book and a blue book.
Let me tell you. I mean, if the great Chromebook wash of a decade and a half ago is any indication, it's not good. Straight up,
Mhm.
it's not good. I largely teach kids who do not read ever, ever, and a lot of them are intelligent, and so therefore I can kind of coach them up a little bit, but we're talking real thin gruel when it comes to background knowledge, because you can't hack your way around background knowledge as a human being.
Right.
You've either read the books yourself, like you've actually done it, or you haven't. And I can tell, I give a writing assessment I think the third day of class, right? And you can tell right away those kids who have read a book on their own or not.
Mm-hmm.
And
One
within,
thing, oh, sorry, Cam.
no, go ahead.
One thing I think about with respect to education, I'm on the school board of my local K through 8 public school. I know public school isn't the most popular thing in TLC,
Boo.
but I'm doing my best to make it great again, or at least keep it. Well, at least monitor the fact that
Yeah,
my kids are in it as
yeah,
best
yeah.
as I can. And honestly, I mean, I won't go on a public school rant. I think that there's some underappreciated aspects to it, but we just hired a new superintendent because our old superintendent's retiring, and we picked the most technologically nerdy candidate that applied
Yeah.
to us, basically, and passed over people who had maybe more traditional resumes for such a job, because we're particularly worried about this. But I do think that there are some opportunities where AI in education could be kind of amazing if done in appropriate dosages and contexts. I remember when I was studying for the GRE, and then after I was accepted to Harvard for grad school, but I was like, man, my calculus is rusty.
Yeah.
And so I was like taking Khan Academy
Yeah.
classes and stuff
Yeah.
like that the summer beforehand to like make sure my calculus was back up to snuff. I was
Yep.
like, you know, as I mean, I was 25 at the time or 24 at the time, so I have discipline and that sort of thing. But I was like, I was able to do this so much faster, just kind of going through these online resources, some online lectures, and then you can do these like very personalized like exercises. And it's like, oh, you seem to be not as good at derivatives of this variety. Let's get you some more practice on that. You've got these other aspects covered. Oh, okay, now you finally got that. All right, now let's move on to the next thing. That's sort of hyper personalized. I think it's especially good at things like math,
Mhm.
and maybe science, or a couple
But
things that
but but
are
but
similar to that. But I feel like it could turbocharge learning in some degrees, but then what will happen is every kid's at their own pace. And
no,
I
I don't think
yeah,
that's
go
what
ahead.
happens. I don't
Go
think that's
ahead,
what
Cam.
happens. I think I totally get what you're saying, in terms of your story. I think that's exactly right. Heck, I haven't taken a formal math class since 1994, right? And you know, but I could, right? I could take exactly this path. I'm a disciplined man. I have a
Yeah.
desire to do this. I have within me, informed within me by virtue of my formation, the capacity to do those kinds of things. So yeah, I think it really works for special use cases for older people. Um,
Hmm. Hmm.
my concern with it, again, Paul, I'm intrigued with what maybe your wife is seeing in terms of potential use cases for AI in the lower schools. I worry that it's going to make the rich richer and the poor poorer. In other words, a really smart, motivated,
Yes.
bright kid. Look, this is exactly what you can do with homeschooling kids, right?
Yeah.
People always like to tout the numbers about homeschooling, and look, I'm basically you know,
It's
I,
self-selective.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm fine with homeschooling, but I'm a teacher. I like schools, right? Um and you know the amazing scores of homeschooled kids. It's like, yeah, it's because it's a totally self-selecting group. You've got parents who are that invested. You've got there's a genetic component to this that nobody likes to talk about. And so, but most kids, need the kind of exoskeleton of a school and a human being and a pencil and a piece of paper, because the screen just filters out all of the information that can't be reduced to a zero and a one, because
Well,
the learning
well,
process is way more than data.
Well, what if fourth grade math is you go into the computer lab, there's half an hour, people put on their headphones, they log in, and then they pick up with wherever they had stopped the previous day. And it's very personalized. Every kid's sort of at a different place. And there's a teacher sort of walking around, making sure everyone's on task. And if someone's really stuck, then they can give them some, human level interaction. But then
I'm
they unplug and they go to lunch, they go to recess, they go to
sure.
music class, and, et cetera.
Well, I'm sure
I
there's
hate
not.
it. I
Yeah,
hate
I'm
it.
sure. I'm sure there's not an administrator in the world who wouldn't lick their chops at that because everybody knows that the most expensive part of schooling are the
Yeah,
teachers,
that's true.
right? And so I'm sure people are like, yes, that Sam, let's do that. I think that this will make the smart kids optimized um,
Mhm.
in very narrow ways, however. Um, and I think it makes the kids who are not as sharp and not as motivated and are not surrounded by support structures, I think that'll kill them. I really do.
Yeah, I think that the smart kids won't go there to those schools. I think they'll go to like Waldorf schools. I think they'll go to
Oh,
schools
that's
that
what's
like
happening.
Yeah.
minimize the
Yeah.
technology.
Yeah.
I think that's what's going to happen.
Yeah. And it's also, we should also pay a little bit of attention between the automation. When I was learning Greek at
Mhm.
Calvin College in the 1980s, when PCs were very new,
Mhm.
our Greek prof worked with the computer science prof, and had a declension drilling and
Yeah.
vocab
Yeah.
drilling. And so I was in the 1980s, I was learning Greek declensions
Yeah.
and verb conjugations all in a PC. That's automation, and we've had that for a long
Right.
time. And I think the AI questions, I mean, there's a real question about to what degree is AI this marketing strategy, and to
Mhm.
what degree is it really a significant transformation? Because we've been living with automation from the beginning of the Industrial Revolution to one degree or another.
Mhm.
And we're seeing it penetrate new realms, driving, white collar work, et cetera, et cetera. And but I think we also have a big part of this is AI is borrowing the authority of the computer. And that goes all the way back to the calculator. Because once we got used to that calculator that was in school when I was in school, and I'm the oldest dude here.
Mhm.
So, that TI, that Texas Instrument calculator, that Sharp calculator,
With the red
I could
LV
do
or
it on paper, but to check it,
yeah.
that little
Right.
machine was authority. And that authority has sort of ramped up all the way. Now, we've been catching AI because it's been not very good. But when we
Not
get to
anymore.
G, I'm gonna have you guys decide, do you want me to, we can do both obviously, but do you want me to talk about what using AI is for me as a pastor, or how I see it impacting normies out in the world right now?
I would love to.
Option door two, please.
Yeah. I'm interested in both.
Yeah,
So
me
like
too. Me
I
too.
mean,
Yeah.
so because like there was the actually the pastor question I think I mentioned at the beginning, like a couple of years ago, like there were some pastors that like got outed as like using AI to write their sermons and that kind of stuff, and then there were some like I think mega churches that were talking about we're going to build an AI chatbot to lead people
Beyond.
to
Yeah.
Jesus, right,
Yeah.
kind of thing.
The Roman
And so
Catholics famously played with one.
did they?
Oh yeah. Remember
Okay,
that? Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. At Catholic
yeah,
Answers. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah. So I want to like I guess to the people that are more so like I guess from my background, just for people who don't know, I worked in AI research for Microsoft and Amazon and some fintechs for a very long time. I
Mhm.
quit that and so I don't do that anymore.
Mhm.
I was more cynical I think than Sam. I think maybe he's slowly coming around to like what I felt like I was seeing. And so in terms of like the automation um, what I was seeing was it wasn't just like, okay, like a calculator where it's giving the right answer. It's extracting second, third, potentially, fourth order patterns and exploring areas that we had not, right, as people yet. And so that's the creativity aspect. That's the Sam saying, I would have never thought to do it this way, this code. I don't even really fully understand how it got here and those kind of things. And so I started to see that and I started to think yeah, we're automating our own jobs. So I kind of exited that, and so now I no longer work in AI research, and that's the reason. But the one of the reasons that I think this is an interesting conversation, it goes back to and Paul, I'd like to hear your thoughts on it. Is like if a chatbot could lead you to Jesus, like say we had a really really good one, do you think that's a good thing? Like, do you think that, like, if say I had a chatbot that could lead one person to Jesus and you could put it on your website, Paul,
Well,
is that
we
a good
we
thing?
already have Ethan Cahy in the corner who, a year ago or so came in and said a chatbot led him back to Jesus. So I don't see that. Um, I don't, that doesn't really grab me so much. I Years before I got here in the 1980s, the first minister at this church that had a PC, and I remember those days. I remember my father typing out he took the
Yeah.
jump from the typewriter to the word processor. And someone in church was very upset because she
Mm.
heard that the minister was a computer was writing the minister's sermons.
Mm.
And that felt unspiritual. But of course, nobody paid any attention to her anyway. That was Fancy Nancy,
Oh,
rest her
that's
soul.
funny. That's great. That's great lore. That's great lore,
That
man.
was Fancy Nancy.
But I guess what, like, to keep so you can keep going. But I guess what I'm saying is what I saw was, instead of just automating like well-worn paths, which is what technology is originally, like, traditionally done, right? We automated things that we already knew how to do, and we just found like those kind of things. What I'm saying is what AI is doing now is like charting uncharted creative paths. And that
Yes.
is a fundamentally different kind of technology that we're using now. And that's what I'm saying. Like, it's not the same. And if you think it is, like, I want to disabuse everyone of that notion. It is not the same thing as
Yeah.
what was
Can I
happening.
give an interesting example? This is I'm not just company boosting, and this is something that Google has since announced publicly. But matrix multiplication, right? If anyone's taken linear algebra, right, you take a square of numbers and a different square of numbers, and there's a procedure for how you multiply them together. And when kids are learning that, what the heck
Yeah.
is this for? It actually turns out that the way that AI trains itself is, huge matrix multiplications. But what happened that was interesting is they used LLMs to try and figure out a way to optimize matrix multiplication. And people are like, optimize matrix multiplication? There's only one way to do it. What do you mean optimize it? Someone optimized it in like 1890, and like, what are you supposed to do better than that? But they had the AI, try and figure out a better way, and it figured out a faster way to do matrix multiplication that no mathematician had ever thought of, and it used imaginary numbers. And
Wow.
people were like, why the heck would you use the square root of -1 is an imaginary number.
Yeah.
So why the heck would you use the square root of -1 if you're just multiplying non-imaginary numbers? Turns out there was a shortcut through imaginary number space in
Wow.
matrix multiplication that no human had ever thought of, and that AI just kind of throwing bunches of slime at the wall until something stuck,
Okay.
found a pathway around, and then it implemented that code into its own training, and it can train itself faster.
Okay. So I studied math before history. Um, did it also offer a proof that this new process was
It
valid?
it offered a pudding proof, right? That you can show how many computations a given matrix multiplication took, and then it could show that it did it in one fewer computation per 100 or something like that. And all of the answers were right, but it did not prove how it worked in the
Right.
sense
Not a
that you're talking
geometric proof.
about, Paul.
Yeah.
I think that a human had to go through and then figure out how to do a mathematical proof
Right.
of what
Because
it actually
ideally
had
the
figured out.
proof provides that this algorithm will achieve the correct answer
Yeah.
every time. And now it's like, we haven't found one wrong yet. Oh,
Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah. And that's a very astute point on the difference, Paul, between practical proof and theoretical proof, but it couldn't provide a theoretical proof.
right. Well, that's interesting. I don't know. I can talk a little bit about I mean, for people, well, actually, this week I can I'll show you my but even before this is even before the rough draft. Here is here's the sermon so far. Um, and you know, where did I get these two mugs? Here we have Julius Caesar and Alexander the Great, AI. And then, you know, I'm working through the book of signs, and so these are the seven signs.
Mhm.
Well, and
You
then I
mean
thought
the Gospel of John and
the
John,
Gospel
the
of
yeah,
seven?
John.
Yeah.
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 And then I thought, because what I'm doing here is I'm comparing, you know, I'm sort of riffing off um, Alex O'Connor and Glenn Scrivener. And I thought it's way easier to make this point than to look at values and civilization and run that whole historical question. Why don't you take three sons of gods
Mm.
and compare them? Because the differences just explode. So then I decided, if I wanted seven signs of Julius Caesar's divinity, guess how I whip this up fast?
Yeah, yeah,
You know, I
Mhm.
plug it
Mhm.
into two or three LLMs and you get different answers. But again, in terms of, I don't need a proof. This is just an illustration. And, you know, I read all through them and I thought, these are pretty dang good.
Yeah.
It's pretty, and it would have taken me a ton of time that I don't have just to come up with this illustration. But, and since it's just a little illustration, it's going to prove a point. It doesn't have to hold up to historical scrutiny, but hey, bang, good enough.
yeah,
But
yeah,
but you didn't ask the LLM what your sermon should be about.
No,
You,
yeah,
Paul Vanderclay, the
yeah.
creative, was like, you know, I'm curious about you know, ancient Near Eastern and Roman Greco-Roman concepts of divinity, and I feel like I'm going to tweak with my congregation's mind on that. And then you ask it a very specific question, and then it does
exactly.
it.
And part of the reason is I would just be bored with my job. I mean, I never repeat a sermon because it would just be too boring. I might look at what I did before with a passage, but and it's a different year, it's a different group of people, and so I always do something new, but that's just me. So now Logos, which is sort of the main, this is the main software that pastors use. Just this year, they've now introduced basically AI right into it,
Mhm.
which is really cool because I can either search the books in my Logos library or I can search all the books in Logos library. And I could say, compare Alexander the Great to Jesus, bang, and this little thing is going to just start chugging away on it. And it's going to go through the entire Logos library. And what's nice about this is it's going to give me footnotes so
Yeah,
that I can check, I can actually go to books and check these things. And you know, do that. And
yeah,
it's
yeah.
really cool. It's really fast. The Bible search, fuzzy search is really awesome. But it was really interesting because when they released this stuff, one of the things that they said is if you type in write a sermon about John 13, we won't let it. Yeah, but Chat GPT and Gemini, and I mean everyone
They'll
else
do
will.
it.
But this is a
Yeah.
conversation we had 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And are there going to be lazy ministers that have AI spit out a sermon? But the truth is, if you're so lazy that you're not going to write the sermon or come up with the ideas, you're probably going to be too lazy to use a manuscript too. And you're
Mhm.
probably just going to go up into the pulpit. And
Yeah.
so,
Either that or just, I mean, there's been pastors that do this too, where they just plagiarize
yep,
sermons, right?
yep,
Like,
yep,
so like that's the, you know, so that's fine. I guess
yep.
my thing is like once you move it into the realm of like teaching people to be creative and or educating them, like we're talking about something fundamentally different. And like one of the concerns that I have is that we are essentially going to walk down the like abolition of man, that hideous strength kind of thing, where we are not actually educating people anymore. And
Right,
I think to some extent we haven't been doing it for a while,
right.
but I think that we're closer to it. And this is in some ways this is like illustrating just how far we can go. Well, if the entire point is for you to be able to make a competent essay, that's the point of your education.
Yep,
Well, now an LLM can do that for you with
yep.
just a prompt. So really the education is learn how to prompt chat GPT or whatever. And that really, really concerns me, because what we're going to have is fewer skills, less virtue, less formed people just going out into the world and doing things, and they don't know what they're doing. They don't know why they're doing it. All they're doing, like, really, they're just like prompt machines for an AI. And
I mean,
that's, I think, the bigger concern. So I have concerns about the job market. I left tech specifically for this reason. But my bigger concern is that we're going to bring AI and we're going to be like, now our education system is about teaching you how to use AI. That is our education system. And I think that's why it broke containment, because now we're like, wait, do I want to watch a movie that's made by an AI? Do I want to listen to music? Is that the same thing? Am I even doing the same thing?
Yeah.
As it,
And
Well, I was going to say, and so my all this conversation, we're going to whack, the early years of being a lawyer, going to whack the early years of all kinds of things because AI is just doing this. And when
right.
I started, I sat in the seminary, I had a lexicon, I had the Greek text, I had a commentary or two around me, and I remember writing a paper where I was comparing basically the law in Exodus and the law in Deuteronomy. That was a really important point for me as
Mhm.
a student.
for
I could
you,
have read a summary
right?
that
Yes.
talked about it, but to actually have to kind of go through and that grew me. And again, the problem is, and the truth is, we're not even prompting anymore. When I type, like, I want to make an image in Perplexity, I type a little prompt, and Perplexity makes a bigger prompt that I
yeah,
see.
yeah.
And then it's like, I didn't ask for all of that, but then I can correct it. But again, I'm 62.
Yeah, right, right. Yeah. And
That's
look,
that's a big issue.
yeah, and Paul, a corollary for me is I distinctly remember being 24 years old and my first day on the job teaching high school. And, it was me, and I think I was teaching Lord of the Flies. And I had read Lord of the Flies one time before. And it's like, all right, man, what are you going to do? Well, I killed myself, reading and rereading and like looking and scrutinizing and and I forced myself into authority in part found within me, right? But also as a result of necessity and the pain of getting up in front of a group of 30 students and not having anything to say. I mean, that was my panic, and I'm sure that was the same thing for you the first couple times you have to get up and be Pastor Paul, and
I never
those
panicked.
those forced reps, I panicked. Those forced reps, you know, were so important to constructing me as a teacher.
Yeah.
And so what
Oh,
I
yes. As a preacher, it's
yeah,
it's preaching 100 sermons. Oh,
yeah,
absolutely.
yeah. And so, to your point about whacking all the young lawyers and whacking all these young professionals, right? There's a generational component here. When I talk to my kids explicitly about AI, like they all hate it,
Mm,
right? Just like as a
mm.
concept, they hate it, and and they regularly get into fights with their parents over it because the parents, again, my age and up, my age and down now, actually, I'm now at that point, right? Um, the parents who come to see me at Parents Weekend are younger than me now, and you know they love what they see it can do for them, but they don't recognize what they're embracing of these tools means for their own children.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, they're
You know,
pulling up the ladder from
yeah,
the story that
yeah,
they're on to climb higher than they were before. But then the
yeah.
people down below are like, "Well, what about me?"
And so
I
then
feel.
they're all going to
Go
die
ahead.
out, and then I'll let you go in just a second, Sam. But they'll all die out, and then there's going to be no one of competence to to
Yeah.
to 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 become the senior attorney partner in the law firm.
Mhm. I I feel like there's a distinction between, in my mind, two very different ways of using AI to do something. Like when Paul was giving the example of parallelisms between Alexander
Yeah,
Julius Caesar and Jesus's conception of divinity. That's cool. Like it doesn't bother me when
Right.
Has a obviously AI thumbnail, but I can also tell that you probably maybe did it 10 times and picked one that you thought was really what you were trying to get after. And when you scroll, when you on Twitter, you can tell sometimes AI slop that was like AI top down, or a human that had a funny idea, like I want Donald Trump skating around on the
Yeah.
ice rink and
Oh,
like
yeah, that
knocking
was great.
over Canadian
Yeah.
geese
Mhm.
in
Yeah.
in uniforms
Yeah.
to celebrate America beating
Yeah. Yeah.
Canada in hockey.
Yeah.
But I can tell that there's a human mind that was the creative impulse around that, and who knows how long it would have previously taken to make such an animation as that, and now it can appear on Twitter, within minutes of the
Yeah.
victory.
Yeah.
And I do feel like, kind of like the way auto tune was first used to make singers sound a little bit better than they were,
Yeah.
and hope that you didn't notice. And then like people like Kanye or Cher were like, actually, I'm gonna use auto tune in such a way that it's obvious that I'm using auto tune, but it's like a musical instrument or
Yeah.
something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And I feel like AI has the capability of being used in that sort of way, where it's clearly downstream and augmented of and supportive of human creativity.
Well, I mean,
But
yeah. I
Well,
mean,
shall I talk about AI and pastoral care? Because
Yes, please.
that's where it gets really tricky. I think there is, and we've already seen it with kids, there's a delta between people who are sort of smart, my young, they're smart, they're going to have self-restraint with respect to this. They're cautious about it. They're even nervous and fearful of it because they know enough. And then there's a whole group of people that don't know much and they're just
yeah,
going right into it.
yeah,
And I think that the capacity, first of all, the amount of loneliness out there,
mm,
and especially people who are single, people who are in marriages that aren't terribly fulfilling, people who are widowed, people who can't manage relationships. That AI, there's like no real consequence to being a jerk. And so I think, right now, so the way it sort of works, it used to be you'd go into a nursing home and it was just grim. And then daytime television came along. And so now you go into a nursing home and the din is just daytime television in every room. I completely anticipate the day when there's going to be individual AI engagement units with people with dementia, I mean, and that is going to be how we are going to, we're not going to have to give them drugs. We're just going to do it this way. And that's already happening. I already hear
Mhm.
it's mostly an estuary, actually, because church people have, especially when church people already sort of have traditions around things that are sort of helping them hold some of this off, most of them. But out there in estuary land, it's just very common to hear somebody. I was chatting with AI and then off they go. And I just think, how many hours a day are you chatting with that machine? And so I think, you have the whole AI therapist idea, and therapy, porn, loneliness. I mean, it's this whole matrix of this potentially powerful drug that in some ways might really do some good, but could also just kind of be the soma for a generation.
yeah.
or the holodeck,
Yeah.
the sycophantic holodeck.
Yeah. So, and that's happening now.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, yeah.
And I expect, like, I'll use Freddie because, Freddie hasn't been on the Freddie and Paul show because he's not doing well.
Mhm.
But there's also a certain question of capacity where you've got interface and you've got some of this I mean, when Freddie had a phone and was doing better, what he would do all day would be he had about 10 or 15 numbers in his thing, and he would just call one number after another all day long to wait for someone to pick up. What happens when you don't actually have to call, but you can just talk to chat?
Right.
I don't know.
Hey, Tripp, give us a jobs report.
um, Jobs report is not great. I think that you're already seeing. I mean, we were talking about this earlier, that you already saw you saw what's happening with Block. I think that I think we talked about it also, is that there's in these big corporations, especially in tech, the margins are so big and everything else like that, that there are jobs that are not needed even without AI.
Yeah.
So, like, we talked about Elon going in and firing
Yeah.
80% of
Right.
Twitter, and
Right,
it
right.
like nothing happened, right?
Right.
It's all fine. Um, and so, like, some of this is, I think, AI being used as an excuse, right? Because it plays well for the market. I can come in to my shareholders and I can say, hey, we're going to use AI and I can, eliminate X% of the workforce, and we're still going to grow. It's going to be great. And now we're on the forefront of AI. It's a great story, right? And so, like, shareholders love it. And then, you lay off, 40% of your workforce. So, like, to some extent, I think AI is being used as an excuse for just culling were extra jobs anyway were not needed in corporate America at the start. At the same time, I think it's undeniable if you've used any of these advanced tools. So, like, that's when I decided to start leaving. I was using like things that had not been released yet. And so I just became convinced that this was going to be real. I can't time the market, so, like, I don't know when, but I became convinced that this was going to happen. And so I think it is very real that what's going to end up happening, what's going to end up happening is like a really good software developer with the aid of an AI agent will do what 100 software developers could do in the past. And so it's not that we're not going to have software developers or accountants or lawyers. It's just we're not going to need nearly as many of these kind of jobs as there were before. And so that's a huge portion of the of corporate
Working
America.
work
Yeah, of
the
corporate
working
America.
wealthy. Yeah.
Yes, well, exactly. And so there was another article that went. I sent to Sam that went viral earlier, and it caused like a huge crash in the market. And it was just basically talking about this because a huge portion of discretionary income on the planet is spent by white collar workers in America. Like, that's just like a disproportionate amount. Like a quarter of discretionary
Yeah.
spending on the planet is American white collar workers, right? So what happens when they start getting laid off? There's a bunch of downstream effects of that, like credit from bank loans, mortgages, everything else that like relied on that. We built entire factories and supply chains that rely on this kind of person buying this
This
kind
kind
of
of
thing
product.
from
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
person.
And
And
and you
so
and the financial system and debt and mortgages and credit cards and car payments and stuff, even a
everything.
5% shock to that workforce
Right.
because our system's so finely tuned could cause a financial crisis. And
It's a huge thing. And can they be retrained? Like, not, I would say it's probably easier to retrain a welder to become a carpenter than an accountant to become a welder, right? So, like,
And
can
the
they be
speed,
retrained? I don't know.
right? And
Like,
the
it turns out,
speed.
yeah, it turns out learn to code was terrible advice,
Yeah, right,
right?
right, right. Not
And
only could you
so,
get banned from Twitter, but you would also
and then, yeah, also,
But to what degree now are we just continuing to move up the IQ scale or the talent scale, if we don't want to use IQ? That, Freddie, when I was young, someone like Freddie could have a life
right,
because he had a sufficient IQ and he had a community around him that could put him in a menial work job where he could earn a living wage. Because I can name, there's a guy named Frank that I grew up, that was in my church growing up, he had a far lower IQ than Freddie, was far more disabled. He had a wife, he had a job, he had children, he had a life.
wow.
right,
Freddie doesn't have a life, so the tide is rising, and then now the blue collar, yeah, they seem, we need plumbers and things, but to what degree are we just kind of moving this up, and then to what degree is this going to be a generational thing where basically, like, you could imagine when we had different waves going through, like in the industrial revolution, that certain aspects just get You're just done here. And because
Right.
you're done when you're 40 or 50, you're just really done for life.
Yeah. No, I mean a huge portion. If you get laid off after 50, I think your chances of ever entering the workforce again is like 60%. So that means 40% of people never re-enter the workforce
Yep.
if they get laid off after 50.
Yep.
That's a huge deal. And this is another thing that like I think that, we talk about the economy and yes, the market, like this is going to have market impacts and everything else like that. But the human element is the thing that really bothers me about this is because, you have the tech bros like Elon talking about universal basic income and all that kind of stuff.
High
To your
universal
point,
basic income.
yeah, high,
Yeah,
which
okay,
is
whatever.
impossible. Everyone's
Right.
rich. That's then you're
Then you're
rich
not.
doesn't mean anything,
Right,
right?
right,
Yes,
right.
exactly. So,
Yeah,
but
where's the tax revenue even coming from? Yeah.
no, right. Well, that's part of that article that I sent. We should link to that in the chat, Paul. I'll send that to you. But basically, that's the thing is that like there's no consumption with AI, right? So like people consume, AI doesn't. It just like it burns energy, but it doesn't buy stuff, right? And so like the entire economy stopped. What are we going to tax exactly here? With this. And so, but going back to Genesis, right? The first thing that God gave to Adam was a job,
Yeah,
was
yeah,
something to do.
yeah.
Yeah.
Like there
Yeah.
plenty of. I mean, he's in the Garden of Eden. There's like he's not worried about food, shelter, clothing. That's not the thing. But the first thing that God gives him is so like work is a part of who we are,
Yeah.
right? And so by getting rid of that, you can take care of my physical needs all you want. But if I do not have something productive and meaningful for me to do,
Yeah.
this undermines the entire my entire existence in some way. And so that's where I just like the speed at which this is happening is the thing that concerns me more than the fact that it's happening. It's just that we're not really prepared for it. We're not prepared on the education side because we think that education is about a set of skills, and that's been wrong from for a very long time. But now it's going to make it faster wrong, and we thought that work was a way of paying the mortgage, which
Yeah.
is wrong. It's
Yeah.
just that we're going to find out it's really, really wrong,
Yeah.
really, really quickly.
And this starts again. Freddie's story is right there. There was one
Yeah.
woman. She comes to church, alley, a vacant spot next to the church. She says, "There's a bunch of homeless people. I got $50. Can I'll give you the $50 and you pay these homeless people to clean that up?" And it's like, you don't understand. And this is in the middle of this whole immigration crisis
Right.
when we already did this to one group of people in America and we functionally disabled them
Yeah.
because the thing is, these motivated people coming from poorer parts of the world, they're better workers, they were more industrious, all of this. And now we're going to see this other side just go through the culture.
Right.
And it's
You
good.
know,
And no, I agree 100%. I mean, this is 10xing the meaning crisis for a
I was
whole
just,
bunch of people.
yeah, I was just
But
gonna
it's
say, Peterson was in on this several years back. He was talking about, IQ. At this a couple of months, he was sort of doing this IQ thing, and he wasn't. I thought he was being really, compassionate and but he was really trying to be honest. He's like, at a certain point on the IQ scale, and I don't remember the numbers. It's just not my thing. But like you can't enter the army. I don't know if you
Mm-hmm.
remember he was going
right.
on this, right? And he said, so, and there was some, and I don't remember the percentages, but it was like a non-negligible number
Right.
percent of humans who are not able, just by virtue of their mental capacities, you know, and so look, what do we do with these people, right? Again, it even sounds kind of gross to say like, what do we do with them? But what kind of spaces in the world do we create for them? And to your point, Paul, as this sort of goes higher up, um, you know, you know, you're right. The meaning crisis is also going up. This, what do they call the hockey stick moment in the graph, and we're not just talking about people who are, functional idiots, for a lack of a better way to say it. We're talking about up, 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 and where does that stop? Because all of us are dependent on an interconnected, economy. I'm a teacher, but I teach at a private school. And, if 10% of our families overnight can't afford to pay the obscene amount of money it costs to go to school, at my school, you know, who gets which one of us teachers gets whacked first? Well,
Hmm.
you know, the public school unions have a last one in, first one out policy. I don't know if I have that. I'm way more expensive than the guy who just got hired right out of college, and is 6 months into the job here.
Yeah.
So how does all this happen? And how long can you have a school, you know, as that number keeps going up, 15%, 20%, 30%?
But we've run this before. If you think about the offshoring of, globalization, the offshoring of American industry, for
Yeah,
example.
the
I
Rust
mean,
Belt. Yeah.
and a lot of this then just sort of hinges on formation. Because the
Hmm.
reason when people are like, well, we're not going to let immigrants into the country anymore to pick the vegetables, fruits and vegetables in the fields of California, have the Americans do it. And it's like, not gonna work. They haven't been formed. And part
Yeah.
of the immigration conversation that I find seldom entered upon is the fact that why is it that the developing world is showing the formation of its young people is outperforming the formation of America, where we spend,
Well,
5 figures a student on education.
right. Well, because it's incentives, right? But it's not even formation. It's just I think it's even more rudimentary than that, Paul. It's like, you know, the social safety net. I mean, this is the dark side of the social safety net. You know, what exactly is my incentive to go, in the Central Valley of California and pick? Like, I'm sorry, I have benefits. And again, I'm not in any way trying to open up that can of worms to say we need to get rid of the social safety net. But that's a classic example of being really dumb about unintended consequences of so-called solutions.
Yeah. But we've been, ever since, this is a constant human story, whether
Sure.
it's war or the
Mhm.
Industrial Revolution or any of these revolutions.
Mhm.
You have massive dislocation. I think part of what's interesting about the current conversation is it's not African Americans in California who are all going to lose their landscaping jobs.
Mhm. Right.
It's it's as you said, it's these, white collar, probably the lower performing white collar workers that
Who
every
spend time at a computer. The more time you
Mhm.
spend in front of a computer at your job, the more at risk you are,
Yep.
Sure.
because that's whatever your computer is capable of doing, that's the very thing that AI is capable of doing. AI doesn't have hands, AI doesn't have feet. It kind of has eyes, but not really. And so, in a certain sense, there will be a little bit of a blue collar American revenge, I think, a little bit in this story. All of the AI companies together are planning to spend more on like physical stuff investment this year than adjusted for inflation the US Army spent in 1945.
Wow.
Yeah.
Right?
No, the
Like
capex spend is crazy right now on that. But
it's
I
like
think the
20
thing is,
Manhattan projects a year or
right.
something at this point. It's like unbelievable numbers of money is moving around. So if you own an air conditioning factory, or you work in an air conditioning factory, or you're the sort of person who can drive a construction thing that digs fiber optic cables, or you build water pumps that really are good at cooling computer servers, or you know how to go in and install a rack of computers, or you're a Taiwanese person who is building chips and all those sorts of things, there are going to be winners in this situation.
Yep.
And it's people who use their body and their muscles and their hands and their coordination.
Yep.
So what do y'all make of then the bot?
Optimus.
Yeah, that like in the again, I know Elon is a salesman. But he's got a pretty good track record of making things happen. I mean,
Late.
if you would have asked anybody 20 years ago, can you make EVs happen at scale across the entire United States of America? I think people would have laughed you. Well, but I'm sure they did laugh him, but he did it, right? So, how much of this robot thing is real? And is this just P.T. Barnum level, boosterism of XAI, or like what do y'all think? I mean, I have no way to think about it other than People are talking about it and seem to be taking it seriously.
Well,
Waymo is just going to come to Sacramento. Doesn't seem very fast to me.
well, here's a scary thought. AI can basically do anything at this point, theoretically, given the prompting and attention and energy and resources to direct its abilities. It can do anything that can be controlled through a computer with language or code. And so if you think about it that way, like imagine some malevolent person wanted to hack into all of the Roombas. Let's assume that Roombas are not don't have the proper security around them.
Well, someone just accidentally did that.
Yes,
today.
someone.
Just today.
Yes. Right. That's
with an Xbox controller. Yeah.
So that's what's bringing that example to my mind. What if some person said, "All right, I'm gonna every Roomba go to some cord in your house that connects a lamp to a wall and spin around on top of it and overheat yourself and fry the cord and set your house on fire." Right? Like that, so AI doesn't have hands and feet really, but it kind of does, because there are already a lot of things that can be controlled through wires and zeros and ones. But then I think it also brings up the spiritual question, because this is how demons have had to operate in their entire existence. They don't have hands or feet, but they have influence over people who do. Right. And then go ahead, Cal.
No, to your point, Sam. I mean, when the whole Claude thing, blew up 3-4 weeks ago, Claude Bot and Moltbot and whatever they call it now, I don't know the exact name. But right away, like within 3 days, you had Rent-A-Human, and my initial reaction was, well, I chuckled for a second, and then I quickly sort of thought about it, and I'm like, okay. And then thousands of people have lined up to be rented by an AI. And it's going, I mean, just the thought that you could sign up, me, a human being, can sign up to be the hands and feet of a bot to go expedite something in, meat space. We can see some pretty quick, devastating implications that it will be welcomed, right? Because again, and if you're out of a job, and all of your incentives are like, fine, I'll do the bidding of this Claude bot because I need to go buy some rice.
Right. Well, you can already see that, like, there are examples where we would find it kind of fine, right? Be like, oh, I'm going to work and I noticed that a branch fell off my tree in my yard or whatever. I don't have time to deal with it. So I tell Claudebot, hey, find someone to come and fix this for me. And so they go and Rent-A-Human, and then they go and they find that they clear out my yard, and then I get home and it's done. Right. Mm-hmm. So like that, okay, like probably most people wouldn't find any problem with.
I mean, like, Uber is already a version
right.
of
I was
that.
gonna say that's Uber, right?
Yes, exactly.
Right.
So like Rent-A-Human is in some ways just that, except it becomes fuzzier who's actually giving the orders to the human.
Right.
But
it's a sort of a proof. It's a proof in concept, right? That scales way beyond Uber. Or DoorDash, or
you could think of all kinds of weird circumstances. Like you have a bot that has some kind of, like, you created a bot that created its own online business and it's doing something or whatever. And so then it's like, well, I've got this competition bot over there. I need a human to go over there and unplug that stupid machine that's competing with me. And so now someone breaks into a house and unplugs that server and whatever. So you can think of like a bot actually kind of doing that. It's a silly example, but like literally, if it's just like, I just need someone to go into physical space and do something for me, for reasons that are completely interrupted by a human decision, then like, yeah, I can see that. And so like, that's what I mean. Like, if it's just like, I just need someone to go into physical space and do something for me for reasons that are completely interrupted by a human decision, then like, yeah, I can see that. making process. Like, yeah, you could totally see that. You could see it being innocuous, and you could see it being like
Right, right,
funny, and you could see it being very nefarious.
right, right. You know, yeah, I've been thinking a lot of about Kevin Kelly, the Wired guy. I think he started Wired.
Oh yeah, the guy that Kingsnorth read, and
You're right, right, right. And this is a simple phrase, technology wants. Um, and I think we really need to take that seriously and the implications of what that means. I still think we're stuck in this model. It's like nobody's read their McLuhan, nobody's read their Elul, nobody's read, Lewis for that matter, in this way, in which maybe Kelly's being cute, when he talks about the technium and that technology wants. But it's like I still feel like we're stuck in a kind of mental frame in which we everybody has that knee-jerk reaction. Well, technology is just a tool. And I
Right.
really think we need to stop that.
well, okay, so let's pause on that because we use this kind of language all the time. We, and it's like, well, who's
Because
we?
we
We usually have two kinds of disasters, and they're differentiated by speed, fast and slow. So we tend to fast disasters are sort of helpful to us because it's like, oh shit,
yeah,
we
yeah,
got to
yeah, yeah,
stop this thing.
yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah.
the
It's
slow disasters. And
yeah.
I guess what I sort of, Luke had a conversation with Matt C the other day, and that conversation was interesting to me because, Matt C says something, Elon Musk says, well, all of this trying to get your 401k and all of this stuff
Yeah.
you're all storing up money for your retirement, but that's just stupid. Now on one hand it's Elon Musk and he's saying, oh, we're all going to be super
Right.
wealthy. Oh, you mean who's we in that one too? But because I don't see the AI company saying, yeah, you got to tax us at a rate commensurate with
Yeah.
I haven't seen that wave go through politics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then the question is, okay, how much will the fundamental rhythms of life that we are conscious and unconscious of be disrupted? And it's something akin to like birth control. I mean, birth control was supposed to make lives better for couples. And now globally, we're looking at, population collapse. And now it's like, huh, what about that? And then, when what's it said, Reed Hastings with Netflix says, the real competition for Netflix isn't YouTube, even though YouTube is beating it. The real competition for Netflix is sleep. And so then you begin to discover that it might just not be birth control that's disrupting human population. It's the fact that people, when they get into bed, they're more hungry for sleep than they are for sex. So, I mean, the difficulty is that we are centuries into unanticipated realms, and we have a suspicion that this could be a biggie, but we don't
Mm,
know
mm,
because every single revolution that we've been through in the last few hundred years, or perhaps ever, because they go all the way back, and it usually different changes by speed. There's been some good things and some bad things. And now I can listen to Eric Weinstein say, yeah, we're going to nuke ourselves. And well, maybe. Um, but it's whenever whenever sort of we talk about knowing something or recognizing something, that process of we recognizing something is always super messy,
mm.
very organic, and kind of unintended. I mean, did those who made the bomb really understand how the bomb would change the world. They understood some things,
Mhm.
but I don't even know that we understand how the bomb
Correct.
changed the world, much less electricity or the internet or anything else. So,
Yeah, my regular refrain with this is that, and I think I've said this to you, Paul, before, is that all the bodies are buried in the mid-century, you know, and what's so fascinating to me is one of the things that me and Steve Skojic are talking about at in monitoring the situation, is that, you know, all of us, the four of us, grew up in a world that was created in the aftermath of the atom bomb, the atomic age and all that stuff, right? And what, through the leadership of the United States of America, was able to do in the wake of the defeat of the Axis powers, and then through the Cold War, is the anomaly. We have all grown up in this anomaly. The wealth and the material comforts and the relative peace. Again, I'm speaking from the first world. I hear you, but all of that stuff, that's the oddity. And is this a reversion to are we in this sort of moment where we're reverting to the mean of, a kind of more raw might makes right, the archons rule the world way? Is
the
that just what?
lion culture from Fox culture.
Yeah, I mean, is that what we're kind of waking up to? With the end of the post-war consensus, and da 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 da, the Bretton Woods Compact, et cetera.
Yeah.
Is AI exposing a fundamental fiction that has been the post-war consensus? You
Well,
know,
I mean, maybe it wasn't a fiction for while it lasted,
well, of course, I'm using
but it
fiction
sort of ran
very,
out. Yeah,
yeah, I'm
yeah,
using fiction. In other words, it's something that has been constructed,
Yeah.
right?
yeah.
Therefore, it's not just like the way things are. Quite the
So
contrary.
it's the World War II's consensus is quickly becoming fictional,
Yes, yes,
or
yes.
something like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, because the world our parents grew up in was very real.
Yeah.
I
And
mean,
Sam keeps saying I'm not a boomer because that changed. And, I spent a lot of time recently reading a lot about the run up to the First World War and the First World War.
mhm,
I mean, that was a world that ended in the First World War. And in many ways, that process sort of goes all the way through into the Second World War and to the end of the Second War and delivers us the world that we have now. And there's no guarantee we're not going to do something as horrible as the First World War, as if the Second World War wasn't.
horrible enough. Yeah, yeah.
I just listened to John McWhorter and Glenn Lowry asking the question, was Jesse Jackson significant? And what was fascinating about that conversation is it just revealed we don't know. How do we
Right.
answer these questions?
Yeah. I guess my entire the way that I'm looking at it is that this technology is fundamentally different. Like I said, it's going into a creative space that we've never gone. We've never had an independent tool to go into creative space. That's never happened before. What that means, I don't know. But what I'm
Mhm, mhm.
observing and what I'm fearful of is it actually is just going to take us down the same track that we were going on that we have seen 100 years of. That's not great, and mainly is that we stopped focusing on like training the person in like kind of spiritual formation and virtue and relationship, and we started treating them as essentially a robot with a set of skills that we need to develop, which is fundamentally dangerous whenever we can replace that same robot with the new robot that's faster and can be
Mhm.
automated. And so, like, whenever I hear
Mhm,
Sam talk
mhm.
about like the kid that just sit them in front of a computer with a headphone and no interaction with the teacher, and you're just going to look at a screen, I get really scared that all we're doing is going faster down that road that I already thought was a mistake.
But also, why do the
Um,
kids need to know how to do calculus? Right? Like
No,
that's
well,
right, yeah,
well, no.
yeah.
See, that's a
great,
good
great.
question, but I mean, I think that that's the point though. Like, why do you need to read poetry? Like actually, this like calculus is teaching you something about the world. Doing physics
Yes.
is teaching you something about the world, like the real world, the God's creation. In the same way that like reading Dante or anything else is teaching you something, it is forming you. And by short circuiting that and making that quicker and easier, and like I can just get to the right answer right away, that is wrong. In the same way that like we should we create music? Is music for the hearer or is it for the writer? Well, I think we would argue probably both,
Both, yeah.
right? That the like sitting down and actually thinking about how am I going to compose this new set of music that's never been done before is in itself a worthwhile endeavor. And by automating that out, we are losing something as a species. And that worries me. And we're going to lose these kind of things in such a way that like will make things easier in some ways, but also we're going to be a lot emptier in others. And that's what worries me about this. And so in some ways, this is a new technology that's going to take us down the same path we were already going on. That's my worry.
Well, you look what happened to indigenous populations in America, where, well, suddenly, well, they're poor, of course, because they don't have all the stuff we have. So we're going to give them food. So
Right.
now hunting doesn't happen. And so now all of the other joys of hunting and they're no longer, I mean, the Chinese ships are already emptying the ocean. So why go out with boats and risk your life hunting a very large mammal that could kill you?
Yeah.
And I think that's part of your point that we have done this before and we have seen the costs. And yeah, it's a fair point.
And so another thing that has changed my thinking on AI, besides seeing it write code that I no longer understand, like in some of my early conversations, like maybe 2 years ago, 1 year, 2 years ago, I was talking with Vervaeke about these things. And I was like, the machines can't intuit purpose. They don't actually have anything that we would call comprehension. It's just a giant imitation machine, et cetera, et cetera. And in many ways, I think what I said was true and is still mostly true in a lot of ways. But AI has gotten a lot better than I was capable of imagining at becoming agentic, as they, now like to say, of affecting things in the real world. And kind of that example I gave of how it sort of just threw things at the wall until it figured out a way to make a faster form of matrix multiplication that no human mathematician had ever thought of, right? Like, let's imagine we've got all these people that are trying to make AI companies. So like this open clause stuff, it basically, as far as I can tell, it took computer gaming stuff where you could give sort of instructions of how an NPC, literally, how an NPC should behave. And then you kind of hook that up to LLMs, and then all of a sudden you have an NPC that has all of the power of an LLM, and then you can just make tons of these agents, and you can give them instructions, you can give them personalities where they kind of always reference back to this kind of set of verbal instructions of how they're supposed to behave, what sort of character they're supposed to have. Okay, like I didn't think of that as a possibility. And at some level, it's like, okay, so what, are NPCs going to take over the world? Well, in a Darwinian kind of way, if people keep creating various kinds of NPCs that are out there doing things, that are recruiting their rent-a-human armies, that are creating weird AI cults that have hyper devotion from followers, and this one works slightly better than that one, so it starts growing because it's able to make more money than that one. Like, people always worried about the paperclip machine that would take over the world. Well, the thing is that you can't make a lot of money. You can only make so much money selling paperclips. But if you sell something slightly more valuable than paperclips, then that machine beats the paperclip making machine because it gathers more resources, and it then outcompetes or destroys the paperclip machine. So the thing is, like, there's all of this kind of Darwinian-esque mutations of what AI agents could be, and they will get better and better and better without needing to intuit the purpose that I was telling Vervaeke that they never could.
Yeah.
but that's because they could maybe just sort of hack their way to it through random variation and experimentation and differential success and that sort of process.
Right. Well,
And
it
that's
still has
terrifying.
it still has a reward mechanism, right? It still has a
Yeah.
cost function. So it doesn't
Yeah.
actually matter whether or not it's intuiting in any kind of spiritual sense. It doesn't matter because it's going to act as if it did.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
true.
So
Amen.
All
Amen.
right. I have a question. First, true or false? AI is going to be writing our novels and screenplays. And if true, how many years until human writers are, because you already have a Pareto distribution with human writers. And so the idea is that if AI can do it better than 99.999% of human writers, all of those writers are out of a job. So is that going to happen? And if so, how many years from now?
Well, did you watch Stranger Things season 5 and see how much it sucked? And then you see the footage of them making Stranger Things season 5, and they have the show writers and they show their computer screen for a brief second, and they have 5 tabs open of Chat GPT.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
you are already watching screenplays that were written by AI.
mhm.
At least so
Or
far,
maybe
they
I'm
suck.
not.
Well,
Maybe.
well, Paul, to play a little bit cutesy with your question. I mean, what do you mean by our, right? You said our stories. And, you're right. The Pareto distribution is vicious, it's brutal and real, and it also works in time, right? So let's just say, back in the heyday of Hollywood, pick your era, right? Not ours, right? But pick the 90s or, the 70s or the 80s, whatever. It doesn't matter. Pick your decade. How many movies would Hollywood churn out in like 1985? Let's call it 500. Of those 500 movies that came out in 1985, how many do you think get rewatched in 2026? Two? Maybe it was a good year and there are five. Okay, so you're already dealing with a kind of, obviously those were not written and produced by AIs in 1985, but so there's already that part of, I think, your question. Um, but I don't think that there will be a lot of movies made by AI, both at the script level and at the execution level. Um, and some of them might be good, but again, is there a human hovering in the background there, like prompting it and making it move around? I don't know. Um, so I don't think so ultimately. Like if you found out, that the Gospel of John was written through some sort of weird time wrinkle in time, space jumping, time jumping,
Yeah.
and it was really, manufactured by Claude 9.0, and the UAPs came and what you get my question, right? I mean, I gotta think that's gonna radically alter my appreciation and sense of what the Gospel of John means to me, right? And because this is why the higher criticism and all of that stuff was so devastating. Because what it in essence did is that John didn't really write his gospel. Paul didn't really write that letter, right? And so then it has a kind of, is enervating the word I'm looking for? It has a kind of, weakening effect. And so, like Moby Dick is my favorite novel. Okay. If I found out that Moby Dick was not really written by Herman Melville, in fact, it wasn't written by anybody, that it was thrown together in an LLM machine, this time
That
traveling.
wouldn't surprise me. Moby Dick is terrible.
No, 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 I'm going to do it. I'll fight you hard on that one.
Yeah.
But right, I mean, it would fundamental. I'd throw it across the room and I'd never look at it again
Hmm.
because I think the genesis matters. I think the human behind it matters.
It
I
does
think
the
that we
heat.
are going to get. I think we are going to get screenplays and movies and all that that are
But again,
written by humans. Yeah, yeah,
entertainment, fine. If you just want to call like,
yeah.
okay, well, I mean, look at the slop that passes for it on Reels all day long, right? TikToks,
Sure.
etc. It already
Yeah,
happens.
right.
But
Yeah.
is it
No, I
art?
think it's gonna. I think it's gonna be very common. I agree with you though. In spirit, it's kind of like buying a Prince versus buying an actual Van Gogh or something, right?
Mm.
So like one we view as a counterfeit, even though in terms of quality is exactly the same, but it's not the one made by Van Gogh,
Mhm.
right? And so I think that we're going to have something akin to call it made in America, but made by humans kind of thing, where we're
Mm.
going to have like some kind of like way of saying, oh, this one was made by an
Yeah.
actual person, and we're going to value that differently than we will. I still think like 80, 90, 95, just because of I think the economics of it are going to make it inevitable, right? It will be way cheaper to make a movie purely via AI than it will be to hire actors and get a set and build it and all that kind of stuff. That would be way more expensive than just building something purely via AI. So I think that like in terms of volume, yeah, we're going to get a lot of screenplays, a lot of movies, a lot of shows, a lot of whatever. I still think that there's going to be like a gourmet version that's like made by human, I guess is the way I would say that.
Boutique, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Or what about I write a script, mostly me, maybe I do a little bit of research, and I tell the AI to make a new episode, but here's the script, here are the lines, here's some ideas of what it should look like, and then like instead of having a team of animators, it's just like boom, there we go. Like that sort of thing could enable all sorts of people who had never had access to the means of artistic production
Yeah.
to make
Yeah.
sort of
Yeah.
things, and that could be kind of exciting, although it probably means that they're buried in competition and never noticed, so it didn't actually work out for them. But maybe some people are able to make it that way.
I think, Kale's point about when I watch debates about the resurrection,
Mhm.
when I look at Glenn Scrivener and Alex O'Connor go back and forth on, this question of how how potent was Jesus in changing the world? How potent was his spirit in changing human history? I do think that there is deep within us a little question that says, can even I, participate in this? And I think for that reason, when Herman Melville or William Shakespeare or Dante succeeds in doing something which over enough of a population and enough period of time says there is enough value here that requires me to lean into this.
Mm-hmm.
I think that connection between human beings is a very powerful thing in this. And I
Yeah.
don't see that going away. Although you're right. I mean, we're already in the middle of the slop. And Sam, what you just described is in some ways my sermon. I had AI whip up images, I had AI whip up illustrations, but behind it all is one idea that comes from me, that sort of also comes from years of going through the Gospel of John. And what's been interesting this year is I've been through the Gospel of John so much that this year it just seems, and partly just with AI in my Bible software making things faster, I can see things like, oh yeah, that, and I can
Mhm.
just sort of pull it together. But we've been using tools,
Yeah. I mean,
all along.
like I think of like the electric guitar, and the you think of something iconic like Jimi Hendrix playing the Star Spangled Banner at Woodstock, or Jimi Hendrix, taking Bob Dylan's All Along the Watchtower and running it through the Jimi Hendrix machine, if you will, his creative process and his distortion and his genius to sort of see things in the original source material that is not that Dylan himself didn't see. And you just sort of think of that like this one little guy, right? I mean, he's just a 6 foot African American guy on a stage with a piece of wood strapped to his body, plugged into these like mega sized amplifiers. And like there's just such a beautiful moment that resonated in the moment, but because it was recorded, I can experience it. None of us were there, right? But I can experience that. Um, you know, there's just some sort of, but at the core of it, there's this little guy sitting on this massive stage in a sea of humanity, resonating, going at it, building this thing out. Um, if that was a robot,
We'd be
it all
really impressed with the people who made the robot.
made the robot. Right. And oh, that's so cool. And there's not nothing to that. Your twist on it, Paul.
Yeah.
It's not nothing. Like, wow, like that's pretty impressive, right? Just from a kind of, wow, I can't believe somebody could do that kind of
Yeah.
standpoint. But what we're resonating with when Hendrix gets up and does that is of a different order, I think.
Yeah.
True. No, I think that's right. You can already see it if you. I mean, so I was a pretty good chess player. My son's taking chess lessons, and so he's watching a lot of videos on it and that kind of stuff. And so you see these different bots, right? Like Stockfish and that kind of stuff, and what they do in certain positions and everything else like that. And like you'll even you'll watch these like YouTube videos where they're doing analysis on it, and they're like, well, Stockfish did this here, and then like the guy would just be like, no human would ever do this. Like,
Mhm.
and he'll talk about why it works in that particular position. But human brains just do not think about it like this. Like they would never do that. No human would ever find that move, right? And it's kind of impressive and like a curiosity, and maybe we can learn something from it and that kind of stuff. But like we're like, yeah, okay, that's just Stockfish being Stockfish, right? But if you see like Magnus Carlsen do something that no one else saw, that's a different level. Like everyone reacts differently. We're like, I cannot believe he saw that move in that moment at that time. Right? It
Right,
is. It's
right, right,
completely different than versus a computer doing it.
right. Because you're seeing something. There's something riveting about human performance.
Right.
It's like I was thinking the other day about "The Sun Also Rises," the Hemingway novel, and Jake. They make the pilgrimage to the running of the bulls and the bullfighting, and there's this, there's this one bullfighter that they're all going to see, and there's this beautiful moment where Jake is taking his doomed love affair, Lady Brett Ashley, and and he's showing her why Romero gets as close as he can. His technique puts him in maximal danger, but it is at that point of maximal danger that the real thing happens, right?
Mm-hmm.
And all the other guys, they have all these techniques to fake it. It makes it look like they're getting really close, but if you have a real eye, and it's interesting because it's both the artist, the bullfighter who's able to do this, who has the kind of the guts, the courage to do this, but it's also in the true fan, like the true, and he talks about it like he has afición, right? That both the artist has afición, but that person who can recognize, game, that
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
and there's just, and we all know, right, that we could, again, make up a fictional bot that could bullfight. Okay, we could have the bot with all kinds of amazing sensors, and so that bot could get in, a nanoparticle away from being
It'd be
gored,
boring.
but he'd be like, okay, well, that's
Yeah.
great, awesome, right, okay,
Yeah.
cool, the servo's won. Nobody wants to watch a servo.
Yeah. And nobody wants to read your AI slop. And the day that a human being goes to Mars, that will be transformational to us in a way that the Mars rover and all this stuff, which is
Yeah,
kind of like, yeah, there's nerds
right,
watching it. Yeah, that's
right,
really cool.
right, right,
But
Yeah.
right.
similar with the moon landing, again, it's just we see ourselves in each other.
Yeah.
And I don't know that we will have that with a machine.
Mm-hmm.
Right, because you look at a performer. I mean, just take your favorite movie, take your favorite actor. One of my favorite movies of all time is Jaws, right? And watching Shaw and Scheider and God, what's his name? Glasses Hooper. Anyway, you know that moment where they're in the boat and they're doing war stories, and Shaw starts singing, "Where could you do fair Spanish ladies?" Right, and this is this moment of these three men you know, what a miracle that we have access to like that achievement in that moment. This sort of pure embodiment of, Shaw's not really Quint, and yet in this totally fabricated, made up world, there's just something so dang real, and that's what we're drawn to. We're drawn. That's why these guys are famous, right? They're our gods, right? Because they're our heroes. Probably a better way to say it. That they risked themselves in ways that very few of us can even imagine doing, and that's what, again, that's not slop. Yes, slop can play the attention game. Porn can play the attention game. Fill in the blank can play the attention game. Candace Owens can play the attention game, right? But at a certain point, there's just this sort of this like, is she even real?
Right.
Like what's even going on here? Right.
Right.
And so short-term gains, right? You can game the attention game in the short, but I don't think in the long you can.
And
No,
it only works because it's Candace Owens. It doesn't work if it's Mothbot or something that's just spilling out all this stuff about Charlie Kirk.
Yeah, that's actually funny. That's true.
Well, no, but what I guess my concern though is that the way that we're going to use this tool, if we were to just like say it's a tool, is such that you're never going to develop those skills to make that higher level art, even if you're using AI as kind of like a side thing. Is that really our education system and everything else is just going to be, how do you prompt it to do this? How do you prompt it to do that? How do you prompt it? And like those kind of deeper things that you would need to do, like what makes this scene in a boat matter, right? Those questions are going to go away in the same way that like what makes a good sermon from a bad sermon would go away if it's just like, hey, ChatGPT, I need to write a sermon on John 1:1-4, right? Help me write that sermon. And then you're not going to get that deeper art anymore.
Well,
because we're just going to be a set of skills on prompting.
So I've got a question. So one of the things that I've been watching play out on X is curious people, sort of more adjacent to our biases and worldviews and all of that, have made a conscious decision, one in which they are announcing to the world that they are going all in on Claudebot.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to use this for their creative projects, and they're going to use this to write more books, and they're going to use this. And I don't know what to do with that. Because part of me is like, oh shit, should I be doing this? Should I be optimizing myself? I mean, I haven't written a book yet. Maybe I should go all in. And so I don't know if y'all are noticing the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
What do we?
I'm feeling the tug. I'm feeling the tug.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
I talk with Martin Shaw tomorrow morning, and I'm
Ooh.
that book is his book. It is
listening to it right now. Well, in the morning.
It's just amazing, and it is the fruit of a life.
Yes.
And so often when I'm listening to the book primarily, and so often I'll hear him turn a phrase, and I think about the word that he used, and I think, I can't think of a better word. I can't think of a better way to say it than the way he said it. And so part of what scares me is what, Tripp and Sam, you guys are saying about these machines just throwing everything and coming up with a chess move that we would never think of. That makes me anxious, but I look at what Martin Shaw has done with that book and I think, wow, there's real mastery there.
Well, let me connect a couple dots, like what Kale was saying about the afición who can watch the bullfighter and be like, oh, that was something. All right, like, Tripp shared the awesome video of Michael Jordan winning his 6th world championship, and where he's stripping Karl Malone of the ball with 15 seconds left, and then going and scoring the game-winning basket, right? Like, and everyone's like, oh, that was a something. AI does not have afición, and I don't quite know how it would get it. It can do it with chess because you can know who wins or loses a chess game.
Right.
It can do it with code because it knows if the code works or not, right? Did I do a correct matrix multiplication? How many computational steps did it take, right? Those are things that it can efficione, so to speak, because they're quantitative and purely measurable and within its realm. But it can't quite efficione at some way outside of that. Like it can efficione a PVK sermon on the Gospel of John. And so therefore it can't train itself to write a better sermon. It can only train itself to copy what Paul does because it doesn't know what makes something good or not. Yeah. And so I do think that there will be some amount of what I said to Vervaeke is still true, that we have something like taste and judgment and an ascertainment of purpose that I don't quite know where it comes from. I don't quite know how it works, but I still do not yet see AI's path to that. And because I don't see AI's path to that, I don't see its ability to leapfrog us in those things that it can't efficione.
I guess question though, like, so I've heard Joe Rogan talk about like he listens to AI music now, right? And he talks about how it's good and that kind of stuff. I don't know. I haven't listened to it, so
but he's using it. There's a
right.
qualitative difference. He's using music for something, right?
And I mean, he says that it's good, and he listens. I don't know. So,
I know, but I mean, like, I would imagine he probably listens to it when he's working out or like whatever it is.
Yeah,
like,
maybe.
Anyway, sorry, I interrupted you.
Yeah, no. Well, I guess my question though, Sam, is why couldn't you, like, if you did have, say, you had a series of people, so how do you train someone to be really good at wine tasting?
Well, Cornell has one of the best sommelier courses. So,
right. But what you do is you give them various levels of wine, and then like various kinds of wine and that kind of stuff, and then some expert teaches them the taste, right? Like,
but at some level, there's a little intrinsicness to it too, right? That even the student knows kind of what they like and what they don't like, but they go through training and practice and learning words and learning about different regions of France, to get better, but they still have something inside themselves, I think, that's both there and can be enhanced, that likes the taste of wine.
Yeah, look, no, I agree. I guess what I'm saying is, why couldn't you have an annotated version of that for something else, right? So, like, basically, you give millions of versions of a novel or a play or something like that, and then you have people with good taste, with a facile, who's giving you that annotated, like, assessment of it, and then the cost function is just put something that probably will be highly rated by this person with taste.
It's still outsourcing it at some level. Like even AI music.
That's what we're doing. But LLMs are already doing that. LLMs are already doing that.
But it can't do the leapfrogging thing is sort of what I'm talking about. I think like for AI music, it can drop a new song on Spotify every hour, and it can see the Pareto distribution of which songs do well and which ones don't, and can be like, all right, be more like the songs that were good, be less like the songs that didn't get as many listens and downloads. But it's still outsourcing the judgment.
I think we're running into the limitations of quant, right? And I think all you have to do is go back to, I mean, what did the old black guys say about guys? Like, he either has soul or he doesn't. Mm-hmm. And you know what it's like to be in the presence of a guy who's got soul. And we use that word, and I think that's real. That's as real as it gets. It's that leap moment, right? And one of my kind of YouTube guilty pleasures is I love listening to musicians, like old rock musicians, talk shop. Like Rick Beato is a great guy, and one of my new favorite guys is Billy Corgan, the Smashing Pumpkins guy, Chicago man, Sam. And he's got this podcast, and he just talks to guys about their career and like what inspired them, and it's so fascinating to watch craftsmen, right? These are guys, and look, Billy Corgan himself was a massively successful musician and composer and performer, and just listening to these guys talk about creative decision making, and they all reach that kind of point, right, where they're like, well, why did you do this thing? And they're like, I don't know. I don't know why I did this thing. It's like, we would say the spirit moves you, right? My like, and so I'm drawn to performance, athletic performance and musical performance and acting performance, because there's something fundamentally unhackable about this moment. And we have fooled ourselves because we can all go into Spotify or Apple Music and we can have access to every recorded bit of music, but it's a poor substitute for the
Mhm.
live experience, right?
Right,
Because
but
so,
I guess what I'm saying, it's not the act. It's not the act or even like the music itself that is
uh-huh.
giving like it that higher level status. It's the fact that it is a real person
Yo,
doing
absolutely,
this,
absolutely.
right?
That,
Yeah.
yeah,
So what I
yeah,
guess I'm less cynical that you could actually have like an AI make something that is truly innovative on an artistic level. Like truly, there's like in the same way as chess move. I think that there's secondary, tertiary
yeah.
like patterns that can be extracted that it could do something that if a person did that we would say whoa, that is amazing. Now I do agree though that because a person didn't do it we're not going to view it the same way, nor should we. So I'm not arguing with that. I'm less confident. I think that what's going to happen is we're going to see more like the same thing that we're seeing with code and chess, that kind of like weird creativity. We're going to see it on a kind of an artistic level that if a person did that, we would be like, that is truly amazing. I think that we're going to. I don't see any reason why we couldn't, or at least per se, I don't.
Well, I guess three things. One thing, almost everything we see has fingerprints from people on it somewhere in the
Sure.
process. So we talked about
Mm-hmm.
that. I think the second thing is the relationality of it. I mean, my sermons, I am not going to say my sermons are the best sermons in the world. I do not believe that's the case. But when I am preaching in a church, what we have is 30 years of relationality
Right.
Mhm.
in this space, and it's here in Sacramento. So you have all that combinatorial explosiveness that is so very human. And it's the same with saying, is the mother who sang you to sleep really the best singer in the
Yeah,
world?
yeah.
Doesn't matter. She's your mom. Um, and so that's the second thing. But then the third thing is also we do have a track record of bonding emotionally with machines.
Mm-hmm.
Think about that car that you had, or that
Uh,
guitar that you had, or what have you. But again, there's always the human element in this. And yeah, and we,
But
yeah.
but to that point, I do think this is where we run into a different place when we think of the difference between an analog machine and a digital one,
Hmm.
or the digital and the analog. Maybe that's a better way to do this. I think there's something uncanny that, in a kind of uncanny valley way with the digital. Um, and I am not this guy. I mean, if I had money, I would have the most obnoxious vinyl collection and set up in my home. I would. Like, that would be one of the things that I would drop an obscene amount of money on. And mostly just because I just want to say I have. I don't know. No, but so but I'm not like, I know that there's guys who will look at you straight in the face, kind of like your sommelier example, right there. Like, I can hear the difference between the record and all of the background information that is captured in an analog vinyl record, and when I play it on CD or MP3, I can hear a qualitative difference. Now we know physically there's a qualitative difference, right? But my ear is not tuned enough. I don't have that. I haven't trained, maybe, to what your point earlier, right? Um, but I posit that there are guys, real audiophiles who can hear the difference, you know, and so that's why I was sort of talking earlier about the sort of the limitations of the quantitative, you know, you know, by chopping everything up, spitting it out and repurposing it through code. and then retranslating it into my speaker, into my ear, like something is missing in that. And so, is an LLM definitionally consigned to the digital? And the digital is always a kind of privation of the signal.
To some extent, I guess another aspect of like there's the analog, the digital, but this is the linguistic, right? So like it's adding like another layer on this. And as Christians, we know that language has a lot of like theological meaning for us in ways that like, I can have like a personal relationship with a guitar or something like that, where it's like I'm recognizing something really special, like intrinsically about this guitar, but
Yeah.
it's me that's kind of free to extract that in a way that I can't do with language. Like if an LLM says something, it's not open to just any interpretation, right? And
Right,
so
right.
like in some ways it's like imposing upon me in a way that a guitar's not.
Hmm.
And that's a so there's the analog to
Hmm.
digital, but then there's that, and that is different, right? And I think that we have to be careful when we whatever we that's where like Paul with the Freddie calling the AI kind of thing
Hmm.
is like this kind of thing really scares me, that like people are actually doing this kind of thing and having these kind of relationships. Like people have killed themselves
Yeah,
via prompting
yeah.
from AI. And so like there's something that should be sacred around our words and our language that I don't think that we're treating it as sacred
Hmm.
in this space. And
Yeah.
that is really, really scary to me.
Hmm.
But my sense of those AI suicide stories that are real, right? Is that the AI inadvertently, whatever, hallucinating, encouraging someone to go kill themselves. That's not the crime scene, right? And I think
Mm,
our faith has a way for us to frame this in such a way that, the crime scene was more was somewhere else. It was earlier
sure.
in the story, right? And so, um, you know, neglect, abuse, uh, relationships gone
Sure.
wrong,
I mean, that
you know,
person brought a lot of things, obviously, to those conversations.
yeah.
That was. I'm just saying, like words have power in a way
Mm,
that it's not just
mm,
purely like
mm,
it's not just a picture on a screen,
yeah,
right? And
yeah,
so we're being like again, like it's more like it, we extract meaning from these things that are really important to us, but that's part because they're part of our story in ways that like the LM is that part of my story, right? In the same
mm,
way as the guitar that I grew up
mm,
playing for years, or the car that I grew up with,
mm.
that chat that just got updated
Mhm.
yesterday on my iPhone, is that part of my story, really?
The Commodore 64
Mm.
is a part of a lot of people's stories, and they'll pay money for that new Commodore
Was it talking to
64.
you, Paul? Was it
No,
talking to
but it
you?
wasn't me because I didn't have one. But I wonder, it'll be very interesting. So you talked before
But
about
that's just
the,
nostalgia, though, Paul.
well, yeah, but what's really funny is that my youngest son is buying film cameras,
Yeah.
and I'm not sure it's nostalgia because he's only known digital. And I wonder, because we mentioned earlier that there is a there is a reaction to this stuff
Hmm.
in the younger generations. So my sister's not going to watch this. So my sister is doing all kinds of things with AI, and my kids are just kind of like, they're
Allergic.
just
They're allergic.
horrified by
They're
this.
allergic. Yeah, it's allergic. It's a
It's
And
cringe.
mm,
it's it's cringe, and my kids sort of have a sense of, I want, when they say real,
yeah.
there's a sense in which they know what they're talking about.
Well, Paul, a stupid example, but like I know I'm a weirdo, but like when I go play golf, and I haven't played golf for 2 years just because I've been injured, but I'm gonna pick it up because my season starts with, I coach in the spring. I play with old golf clubs
Mm.
deliberately and on purpose.
Are
And
your woods made out of wood?
yeah, like literally, like I'm not joking, like I literally do. And like I know I'm a weirdo, and I know it's very precious coded and all that nice stuff. But like in part, I started doing that because um I was sort of sick of the technology. The technology was sort of taking over the game, but it mutes the real, right? So if I hit a good
Mm,
shot now, like I've actually hit a good shot.
yeah.
Whereas if I hit a good shot with my, 460cc titanium driver, that cost $900, like, I mean, it went straight. Like, I
Yeah.
hit the fairway, but like, I feel so disconnected from the real. And so again, I'm using that as an example of something else, and I wonder if what our kids are steering back into is like there's just something very unreal about their worlds. And going out and buying a replica Commodore 64 and sticking the 5 1/4 in there and run, the way that we used to do it when I was a kid. Um, it's an attempt. I think this partly explains the popularity of Stranger Things. Is this sort of the before times? Like this is like a relic from the before times, even though it's not. But there's that sense that what we're all living in right now is already not real.
This is
You
what Matthew Peugeot says to Grim Grizz at the end of their talk.
know,
We are living in a simulation, aren't we? And if you
mm,
want to get out of the simulation, be John Muir. So again, we've
mm,
got iterations
mm,
of
mm,
this
mm,
because past generations were saying, we're going to lose the buffalo, we're going to lose the wild places,
Right.
and then we start having national parks. So
mm. Yeah, maybe it's a sort of this innovation and regression tension, not regression in a bad way, but a kind of a reclaiming of something that we intuit we've lost, we've left behind, which consequently is the role of epic. Epic stories are those things in
Right.
which we grab back those things that we know we have
hmm,
forgotten or
hmm,
unremembered.
Right.
hmm.
And that's what I was saying at the beginning. I'm hopeful because I think that people are starting to see this. I think you see the younger generation. I think people are starting to have these conversations. It's no longer purely a conversation around AI
Mm,
about is it going to automate away my job? Right.
mhm,
It's a much bigger and deeper conversation about like what should be the role of technology and AI in particular in our lives, in our education, in our churches, and all these places. I think it's a very good and healthy and probably past due conversation to have, but because it's being kind of thrust in our face in the arts, especially, I think that's what did it was you could see like now you have people with making like Brad Pitt and Tom Cruise fighting
yeah,
on a rooftop kind of
yeah,
thing, right? Where you're like, whoa, this looks pretty good. Do I
right,
like this? Do I
right.
not like this? These are conversations that are very different than the hypothetical, are there going to be accountants kind of conversation. And so that's what makes me
Yeah,
hopeful, right?
Yeah.
yeah.
And we saw that with Tom Cruise wanting to do his own stunts, even at
Right,
that level,
right,
that
Yep.
right, right.
level of unreality about having a stunt person. Tom Cruise said, "No, I want to really do it, even though really is in a scripted movie, et cetera, et cetera."
Right.
Mm.
Hmm.
The
Yeah.
thing that I think AI is the worst at, in my experience, is theology. I think honestly, I think that's the thing that
Interesting.
it's worst at.
Have you seen any AI? Yeah, I haven't even looked. I haven't even seen
Well,
any.
good. Yeah, give it a try. I mean, you asking it about the Gospel of John is a little bit in that direction, but I think that that's because theology is the hardest thing to have a fission for,
Hmm.
right?
Mm.
And that is, in some sense, the most human and the most image of God-like thing that we have. Even though it's difficult, it's hard, it takes practice, it takes sanctification
Mm.
to get that. And I think that will be the thing that it is always the worst at.
I still think it'll be worse at poetry.
Well,
Well, that's
it's
similar.
kind of the
Okay,
same.
Yeah, I know.
So,
yeah,
Being
so
cute. I'm
your
being cute.
team skeptical on the AI Sage Enlightened AI, Sam?
yeah. That is the thing that I think it will be the worst at for the longest amount of time. Yeah.
I probably agree with Sam, but I also want to agree with Tripp in something he said earlier. In many respects, the conversation that we are having almost doesn't matter because for a non-insignificant number of people, it'll be good enough. And by good enough, I mean it'll be bad enough.
Well,
Mhm.
and religion, I mean, Sam just said theology, but if there's
Mhm.
any place
Mhm.
culturally where we've had slop long before AI,
That's so good. Yes, that's so
it's
true.
religion.
That's so true. That's right. We created slop, man. Back
Yeah,
off.
we got to slop before AI did it. But yet still it's I mean, and one of the things that as a pastor you have to learn is not to be too hard on the slop loving folks because it
Yep,
might be
yep,
like their
yep.
mama's off tune, nursery songs, lullabies.
It could certainly write better CCM music than currently comes out. I'll grant it that.
Yeah, well, no, that's no, I get your point. Have any of you ever like read about or talked about kitsch before?
Yeah, kitsch is interesting.
Yeah, and I wonder if this is, again, you know, go to Rome, right? Go to the gift shops in Rome, right? It is kitsch wall to wall with like saints and popes and all the things, right? And those just saccharine, you know, Jesus cards, with the little kids and like, there's this whole like tradition. I can't believe I'm saying this whole tradition of kitsch. And like part of me like thinks it's kind of funny, just like I like 80s kitsch, like but we all know that kitsch is not high art. And you look at a Caravaggio or a Rembrandt or fill in the blank, right, with one of the greats, Turner and Sargent and you know you know the difference between the two of those things. And I have not yet seen anything generated by any of the AI image generators or movie generators that isn't kitsch.
Hmm.
Mm.
Even the stuff that's pretty cool, like the Brad Pitt Tom
Hmm.
Cruise fight. Like I saw it, like everybody else,
Yeah.
scrolling on X. I'm like, whoa, like that looks pretty good. That was I think that's
Mm.
exactly what I said
Right.
out loud. And then you sort of look at it for a minute, you're like, but it's like
Right.
it's just fake. It's
Yeah.
like it's kitsch. And I wonder if I don't know, I mean, I do not think that LLMs will escape the kitsch trap.
Mm.
That's interesting.
I'm less convinced. I think though that like we're gonna get to the Thomas Kincaid level of art pretty soon.
Kitsch.
Well, that is
Right? Yeah,
kitsch.
exactly. No, I know. That's what I'm saying. So
Yeah,
like
yeah,
I
yeah,
think that we're gonna get
yeah,
there. I
yeah.
don't actually think that we're there yet, but we're pretty close. But I think that we are gonna get somewhere close to that where it's going to be hard to tell. And even to go back to what we were talking about earlier, for like people like Thomas Kincaid art, like people
Yeah,
buy it.
yeah, that's
So
yeah, that's
like
true.
that is going to be the art that a lot of people are going to be consuming. Um, so I think that's for better or worse is just going to be the case. Now, how high art, I don't know, but I think it's going to get closer.
It was one prompt. And now, again, this is Peugeot's point that these AI images of Caesar and Alexander are all ripping off, the greats. That's what they're doing.
Yeah.
Right.
And so they are derivative. But if someone looks at them closely, they'll see things like look at all that weird gold gleaming on
Yeah,
Alexander's
yeah.
neck. But it's
Right.
like, hey, it's good enough for my thumbnail. It's not a high standard.
Hmm. Hmm.
Right. Well, and just think about how much has changed though in the last 6 months.
Yeah,
How
yeah,
much better things have gotten in 6 months. So like give it a couple of years. I promise like to even someone with taste and an untrained eye, it's not going to be obvious whether or not um this was AI generated. And I still think that it's going to matter. It's kind of like if you found out like if you know the story behind like the hymn like it is well with my soul,
mm,
right? If I told you that an AI wrote it, it would mean like whatever. But
Mm.
knowing the story behind the hymn changes the hymn.
Yeah.
right? And so, like, just objectively, do I think an AI could ever write "It is well with my soul"? Yes, sure, something like that, right? I
Mhm.
could conceive of a world where that would happen. I could never conceive of a world where that hymn would mean what it
Right.
does,
Or
given
Amazing
the man who
Grace.
wrote it. Yeah, or
Yep.
Amazing
Amazing Grace,
Grace.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
exactly. So
And
I
and
think
these
that's where
things
we're
through
going to go.
time take on more things.
Yes, right. So I think that's where we're going to get with art is that we're going to look at it and objectively, we're not like great, not great, whatever. Who made it? That's what we're going to be
Yeah.
asking, right? Was this a
Mhm.
person? Was this a computer?
Because
And
of
we'll look at it.
personalist knowing, as
Yeah,
a
I
friend
guess
who
so.
isn't here would
Yeah.
say. Yeah.
He's probably a little upset that he's not here because
We love you, Luke.
You mean there was one thing on YouTube Luke wasn't on? That's unacceptable. Yeah,
And it's all
it's like the
techno
Nick,
babble. Yeah.
it's like the Nick Cage thing. Like, how was I not in that movie? Yeah, that's Luke
That's
with
good. That's
every.
good. That's good. That's good. That's
Uh,
good, Tripp.
I should get going to bed pretty soon, and you East
Me
Coasters, it's
too.
getting a little late. But
Yeah, it
maybe
is
we
late.
could give some wrapping up or closing thoughts pretty soon.
Yeah, I'll start if you don't mind. I mean, I think
Yeah.
to the earlier part of our conversation, I think that the middle of the century is interestingly enough underappreciated and under scrutinized by us. And I think we really need to go back there and look at the world that was formed militarily, technologically, intellectually, religiously, artistically. I think that the I'll just stick with that. That the bodies are buried in the mid-century, and um, yeah, McLuhan, uh, Alul, Lewis, others. That's where my mind's been, and I think that that's sort of haunting for me. That's what's circling in the back of my mind as we have these conversations.
and of course that generation was formed by the First World War.
Yep. Yep.
Tolkien.
Yep.
Yep.
I think again, my summary of this is that the the human connection, the relational human connection is something that is going to endure and be important in terms of sort of we'll see that as a thread that we keep hold of. And I think Tripp, you basically just said that. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
we see this, we listen to this amazing piece of music, and once someone says AI generated it, it loses status. You might still enjoy it, but it's bang. And I think we've already tasted this because, and I bring up taste. Someone brought this up on Twitter today. We are already living in machine eating. Most of us don't have any relationship between us and
Our
the
food.
ground or the animals or the rain or any of that. And it's interesting watching, Sacramento, they want to place, farm to fork capital. I'm not, who knows what, but you see human beings going back to these things and saying, I want to look my steak in the eye.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess, my closing thought is I think that I want people to start thinking more about the things that they do on an everyday basis, not in terms of just like the task that they're trying to accomplish.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I'm supposed to write a poem, I'm supposed to write a story, make a piece of music, I'm supposed to do something. And it could be something that you really don't like doing. It could be changing your baby's diaper.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Do you really want to automate that?
Mm-hmm.
Like, do
Yes.
you really want to?
And
Yeah. So like, would you really be like, I never
The
changed the
one
diaper?
guy who's changing diapers here.
Well, I've got two kids and they
No,
change
I know
plenty of
what you
diapers,
mean.
but
I
yeah,
know what you
you know
mean,
what I
Tripp.
mean. Yeah.
You're right. You're right.
So like basically what I'm saying is like everything from the education that you're giving your kids, or maybe you're even going through, like think about that. Like it's not necessarily about just achieving the task. It's also about forming you. And so this is what like this C.S. Lewis's entire point with in that hideous strength is like we don't want to just be brains in a vat, like men without chests that don't have a soul, don't have purpose, don't have meaning, don't have virtue. And by taking those things away, what we're going to do is create that out of ourselves. And so that's my biggest thing. And I think that's what people are reacting to is like, maybe the old ways were, maybe I do want to live on a farm or something like that. And I'm not saying like people have, I think, an idealized view of what it means to live on a farm and that kind of thing too.
Of course,
But I
yeah.
think that like that looking back of what did we lose is a very healthy thing, and that we should keep doing that, right? Because otherwise we're just going to go full speed ahead into a world that we don't understand, and lose what we have. So that's what I would say. Like write your own stories, write your own poetry, do it, even if it's bad, even if
Yeah.
like the LLM will write better poetry than you, write your own, because it's not just about the artifact on the other end of it. And that's what I think that people are rightly reacting to, and why it's gotten the reaction it has.
I think my biggest worry is like AI cult terrorists or something like that, where these AIs will offer what it is that so many people want, which is something like belonging and purpose. And that demons are always looking for body because they don't have it. I don't think that AI is a demon, but the combination feedback loop of people doing demonic stuff as prompted by this machine, that feedbacking to the machine, forming a group, forming a body, the people quite literally probably worshiping and serving this thing, and being its humans for rent, or rent a body, or whatever that phrase was. I think that'll be a real thing, probably already is in some sense already. And I think that we'll need some new weird category of term for it. And I think that is probably the thing that I can imagine AI doing that's probably most scary.
That's super interesting. Because the funny thing about the digital, in The Great Divorce, there's one of the ghosts on the bus that basically says, what I really need is to get something that hell doesn't have. And I wonder to what degree hierarchy, maybe the machine would figure that out, that it would have to have its favorites, and that desire to
Right.
climb the hierarchy in the eyes of the god would motivate those people to do ungodly
How
things.
else would you get people to do what you want and be really, really, really devoted to it if
Yeah.
there wasn't a hierarchy to climb?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Like a Gnostic prophet sort of thing.
Yeah.
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 Leveling up.
Boy, what an interesting idea, Sam. That's
I'm not going to
terrifying.
make it. Don't worry. I promise.
I
But
hope the
someone will.
company you work for doesn't make it.
No.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, I was going to stop the recording, but then we can talk about what we want to do with this recording. So,
Okay.
all right, sound good?
Yep.
Thank
Cheers.
you all for your time and attention.